Change is made through experience, and the gentlemen rowing are making a change. They're experiencing. The people up here have made some major changes in what they've been doing and where they've been experiencing things, expanding the boundaries and everything. And instead of going through introductions each one, we're going to allow them all to start going through. We realize, as Rick has already mentioned, the incredible, wonderful sunshine out there, which some people are looking at, and we're trying to move things along as we've been going. So without any furtherness, we're going to start with Sherry and Paul to come up on their very first idea, and then we'll work our way through and try and figure out the questions and that a little later on in the end. So in that case, I'm not sure whether you're going Sherry and Paul, Sherry, Paul, or how you wish to do that.
Traditional 20th century approaches to teaching and learning are no longer adequate. A new approach to learning and curriculum is needed. Students are bombarded daily with visual and audio media on their computers, iPods, and smartphones, constantly vying for their attention. How can educators be expected to compete with that? And how can students use this new digital language to better understand the world around them? This session explores opportunities to bring new science and understanding of water issues into the classroom as part of the curriculum, to explore activities and opportunities to put that knowledge to work, and to explore new tools, mechanisms, and opportunities to improve learning.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here at the very end of this conference, which as an educator I find as being one of the most engaging parts, and it's hopefully the message gets out to the science group and the industry group, because this is the group that makes it happen on the street. So I'm Paul Bonert. I'm a public educator and have been for 20 years. And I don't say unfortunately, I say can't believe it's been that long. And I realized over the last 20 years that people are creatures of habit. We talk about technology even. You think that's breaking the habit, but how many times do we check our phone in a day? And if there's something that we're expecting is not there, we're disappointed. How many times do we check our email a day? If it's not there, we get disappointed. So what we're going to talk about, Sherry and I, are the special places and where special places came from. This is an educational tool that we use, not necessarily in the classroom, but we use this in the community. The Southern Alberta Community of Environmental Educators is a group that was formed 5 years ago. As you can see by the graphic there, we've taken on some of the belief and some of the feeling that our First Nations group has. We talk about creatures of habit that go the circle. Our seasons are in a circle. As a teacher, we know in September we start school, and in June we finish school, and again we start in September. That cycle is found almost endless in our society. However, do we actually take that cycle upwards or forward? And we believe that with the projects that we've started, that we are. It's just a click? Yeah, it's not doing anything. So we started SACE back in October of 2005, and since that point we have done over 112 activities. And for the math teachers out there or the scientists, if you do that division, that's a significant number of projects in just about 6 years. And over those 6 years, we have had a budget of $12,000, not per year, total. So over the last 3 days, watching online myself and also being in the room, we talk about engagement and the need for passion. We're not only creatures of habit, we're creatures of passion. And unless we're impassioned, no matter how much money we have, our message isn't going to be felt. Public educators, the suggestions that were out there that we should do this, so we should approach things this way. We should be creative. We should allow creativity to happen in our classroom. Educators are no different than the general public. We don't know what we don't know. You think about, for the most of the people in the room here, environmental education and sustainability and water concerns weren't around at the level that they are now 30 years ago. Yet we're expecting those people to teach about it without any background. So as a teacher, being able to talk about something I'm not passionate about because I don't know enough about it, that is a big issue. SACE has done 112 activities. We've done everything from library series, speaker series, to arts festivals, to forming a youth group called the Southern Alberta Youth for Environmental Education, and also hosting TED events. And through all those events, we've been able to do that in a low cost because of the passion that we engage through our speakers and the people that we've asked to speak for us. We've learned from our Aboriginal ancestry and from our seniors, our elders. We've asked them to come into the room, and they're the ones that are talking to us so that we can pass it on to future generations. This all started in our backyard. This is the view out our backyard on the Oldman River, which is part of the South Saskatchewan Water Basin. We live in an area that is semi-arid. We have forests in our river valleys and relatively dry seasons all year round. We thought, well, this is where we live, but where does the water come from? It comes from our taps. And unfortunately, we know more than that. So we followed our water system up to the headwaters of the Oldman River, into the Castle area. And the Castle area right now is under some major issues. They're talking about clear cutting and resource, taking out our resources. So to find out about it and to actually experience was a way to impassion us. So what did we do? We followed ourselves up to the headwaters. This is the Castle area. And we followed the water there. It falls under the trees and goes into the creeks, into the streams, into the rivers, and eventually to where we live. Understanding this is impossible unless you've done it. You've taken the kayak out onto the river. You've gone up to the streams or the springs and touched the water. And before you do that, to watch it on a two-dimensional screen doesn't tell you the story. To read it in a textbook doesn't tell you the story. To listen to a teacher who themselves have never been there does not tell the story and impassion the learner. This is a picture of my son from pretty much the age of 2 to about the age of 6. And we started to look at photographs to include in this presentation. We didn't realize how many pictures we had of water and the ability to be next to the water. Our son is fortunate enough to be nominated as one of the Emerald finalists this year, and he's 15 years old. His competitors are the Solar Car team from the University of Calgary and the Sustainability team from the University of Alberta. And he's gone about doing a number of things that Sherry will talk about a little bit later. So as an educator, we talk about water. Many times our students think this is water and the importance of water. Keep hydrated. Can I go get a drink of water? Did you wash your hands after you went to the bathroom kind of water? But really, where does water come from? I was a high school science teacher for many years and decided that I was moving to middle school because of the lack of time to present information and to share with kids. So when I got to grade 8 science, we had the water unit. It's a 5-week unit, designated 5 weeks. And I asked the students in Lethbridge, how many of you had touched the Oldman River? And I asked 4 different classes. 8 out of 100 students had touched the Oldman River in the city of Lethbridge. So understanding water, even in your own city, was almost impossible. So I took it upon myself and 3 other teachers, and we took this group of children up to our headwaters. We followed the Oldman River up. We went through Fort Macleod. We talked to them, their water people, about the issues they have when they have floods and how they have to dump raw sewage into the river, and that floats half an hour to Lethbridge. That engaged the students. That was a way for them to engage and to think about what goes in through our water systems. We went a bit further. We saw we start to harness the water in our southern Alberta region. The Oldman River Dam has done some great things on our region, allowed irrigation to happen. It allows us to have recreational opportunities, and it maintains our water flow throughout the whole year. But what really hit my students was the real-life people. We stopped at a number of ranches along the way and talked to those people. This particular ranch was washed away in the flood in 2005. The people had just bought it 6 months earlier, and their entire lifestyle was washed away. Then we got to the headwaters. And the headwaters, to them, they expected this waterfall to be gushing out of the side of a mountain. And we arrived at this. This is the headwaters of the Oldman River. It's in a semi-arid area coming down from the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. This particular area in 2005 was washed away. The agricultural community had allowed their cattle to graze along the river and eroded their vegetation along their creek, so that when the flood came through, it completely washed out their watershed. The water levels dropped 2 feet, which has an impact on how things grow. And they realized that unless they reinstituted or reconstructed their watershed, they were going to be in some major trouble. So we talked to those people that planted the vegetation and put up the fences that kept the cattle away. That touched the students, but still they weren't 100% engaged. The most engaging piece was to take them right to where the springs were. And we talked to a rancher who had the springs coming out of the side of the hill, feeding one of his cattle watering troughs. And he talked, and with grade 8 students, their engagement level for a certain period of time is there, especially grade 8 boys. But he talked for almost half an hour in complete silence. He had those kids on the tip of his finger with his first question. Do you want to drink this? It was December 18th, minus 15 degrees, snow on the ground, and there was the water flowing from the pipe. Not one student put their hand up. Then he said, why? He said, well, the cows drink that. And the students themselves didn't realize until the rancher himself took out a cup, drank the water, said, this is pure spring water. My cows drink better water than you do. And as they watched the rancher drink the water, they were engaged. We had 100 students line up to drink the water. The first student, people watched and thought he would gag. He reacted, and people were like, what was that? And he said, I didn't think it would be that warm. It was minus 18 outside on December 15th. That engaged those students. We did 5 weeks of material in one day. And they not only did better on examinations, which in my classroom isn't that important, but they know it, they live it, and now they're active, engaged people in their water systems. Our group has done a number of projects, 112 of them, I think I mentioned. This one was another one that we started back in 2008. We said, how do we gauge people? How do you go and get new people into the choir? As a teacher, I go to conferences and I'm filled with a room of people of all the same interests. If I go to a science conference, there are science teachers. If I go to language arts, there are language arts teachers. If I'm an oilman, we're all going to talk about the oil industry. How do we make our choir bigger? Well, Sherry and I came up with an idea on the banks of the Oldman River, actually. And we decided we were going to run a music festival. Not just a small one. We don't want to start out too small. We decided to run a national one. We brought in artists from across the country. We brought in artists from every corner of our country. From the Yukon territories, from the East Coast, from the West Coast. And we mixed them with kids and seniors and local artists We had 180 performers perform 8 concerts over 5 days. We engaged a community that was not necessarily engaged in the environment. But with the music and the ideas that we had, the discussions that happened when the intermissions happened, when the future ideas were coming up, we came up with other projects. Since then, we've done something every year that deals with the arts. The arts really like our message, that engagement, that impassioned. 2 more examples on the screen. We brought in Callum Graham, who is one of the forerunners, or one of the best guitarists in the country right now. He's a 19-year-old boy, young man, who came in and did a concert to bring awareness to the Castle Crown for us. We've had dancing classes and performances to help engage a different audience out there. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Sherry, and she's going to explain the current, or just past one.
So, welcome and hello to the people who I continue to share the conference with, and also to the people online. Thank you, Paul, for giving the past. It's really the base and what we grow out of with our current project. And I'd like to thank Daryl Jans and also Rob Pisco for providing a lot of the great pictures that we have up in our slide presentation. Through the conference, I've heard building connections and relationships with ourselves, with each other, with the nature, with the past, and into the future. With our past, the Nature and Mind Festival that Paula talked about, we had a storybook created by a local team. And just yesterday, we got to share along a copy of this to 3-year-old Olivia, as well as 10-year-old Adam, who is very excited to take it back to his classroom. And you could see the engagement in their eyes. And for us to be able to continue to have that ripple out effect from the Nature and Mind Festival. Also, this book will be going back to the Alexandria Library. So Yasmin will be offered to take this story back. So it's very exciting how our story is going across the ocean. Stories aren't so much written or created, but released, and have been there all along. Karsten shared that in his presentation with his family that traveled in their canoe down the Bow here all the way out to, mostly by water, to the Atlantic Ocean. And that's what I hope to do here today, is just share a couple of stories to help you understand how we're engaging people through our Peaks to Prairies arts exhibit. This bear here, his home is in the Castle Crown, and just next week we will be having an AGM in the Castle Crown Wilderness Coalition, an excellent place to learn about the area. They offer hikes through the summer. And we have Charlie Russell, who is going to be presenting on his work with the bears in Russia. And also, I use this as a model, was inspired after Sasha's opening presentation, where he said, I get to set the tone for this presentation. And then essentially said, everybody's going to have to dance and move and connect with my presentation. And so it made me think about the Russian bear dance, and I saw each of the presenters get up and kind of go into the middle of the circle and really show their stuff and what they know. And it was interesting that Adam Creek took it past the metaphorical level, and we were up dancing this morning. So I appreciate that we finished off that way. With our stories, we're also highly connected to the Robert Bateman Get to Know program, funded and developed through the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And what we have in Lincoln Common is that idea about being in nature and paying attention to it, and art can be a great way to notice those details, notice the design, and then to be able to not just enjoy it and grow personally, but use that in our own personal design. This photo here is from a Robert Bateman Get to Know contest winner, Colin, who we got to know a few years ago. And this last exhibit series he presented, and that was his first time that he'd had a public exhibit. Within 2 months, he set up his own solo exhibit in Lethbridge and is excited to participate in our water theme for this year. And he's now also a member of the University of Lethbridge, and he's inviting their team in. Also with this picture, if you can see the ravens, one raven you can see clearly, and the other one is, we heard both Narcisse said before, it's not so important what we see, but also what is not seen. With connecting the emotions and the intellect, the brain is a common theme that's come up in the conference. And talking with Peter from the Irrigation Society, he brought up that too, that his daughter right now is studying neuroscience and the arts. This is from Valerie Goodrider. And when she was asked to speak, she said, I ask you to see your own story, find your own story in my painting. With the generations, we connect the generations, and this photo was taken by a young man, 80 years old, who didn't know what story this would lead to. But for those of you who aren't in the Oldman River watershed, which I know because of technology you could be from anywhere in the world, if you could imagine. Huge winds, over 100 kilometers an hour, big winds. It's dry, it's very dry. It hasn't rained for a while. There's a spark, a very small spark, but it hits the grass and it spreads. The winds spread it, the smoke is already starting to curl up into the air. Not long, people traveling to their Grey Cup parties will notice the smoke billowing into the air, and they're already starting to question what's happening. Some young youth may even decide, I don't want to go to that. I want to go find out what's happening at the where the smoke is. And so what we found is this picture. It's the Chinook forecasting the wind to come during the Grey Cup game, where in southern Alberta we did have a big wind and a big fire, and people were tweeting during the game about this, about our fire, where people were being evacuated. So it's interesting where things may come that will engage us and unite us, making that choir bigger. And again, uniting the greater group. This quilt here was created, a member of the Lethbridge Naturalist Society, who's a member of the Quilting Society, took 4 people out, some who had not been to the Castle Crown, and they hiked the Carbondale, and this is the panoramic view. This lady, Connie, who created the quilt, she came to our circles, she shared her story, and afterwards she submitted her quilt to the National Quilting Association, and it was accepted. So now our story of our watershed has gone national into their exhibit currently, and then will be featured in the journal. Connie also followed up and came to a recent Castle Crown meeting where we were learning about, from the top scientists, from Cows and Fish, from the CPAWS, the story of what does it mean to care for our watershed, and looking at the logging, the pros and the cons, and how we can have the best of both. So I guess it's a powerful message on how we can create and connect the emotion with the art, as well as the science. Here it shows the generations. The top quilt on the right is from my granny, and she's going to be turning 90 this year. And she was is an artist of pottery, and also really had true to her heart the watershed of the peaks to the foothills, to the prairies. And the picture on the left is a picture from our oldest son, where it's the first of 3 where it shows the headwaters. There's another one of the foothills, the middle of the story. And then he has it finishing into what Adam Creek would have talked of earlier, into our Hudson's Bay, or wherever your watershed is, the body that it would enter into. We've engaged and brought a lot of ages together, and then we've also created there's a card that's on the right, and so that's another picture of our son. And we start, I guess it brings it back home, we always start with what we know, and then engage and share with other people. So this information now has been taken and put online, so that what we hope is that our experience this year, our first theme was looking at the peaks, and we focused on the Castle Crown, interpreting it from all different artistic mediums, from wood turning and quilting, painting, drawing, photography, to going to water for this year. And it's very meaningful for us to look at water this year. It's often what's not seen, and this picture here comes from Van Cousteau, who again is 90, but he's walking every year around a lake. And one day he happens to see the ice all pushed up, and he takes this picture, and what we see in there is there's our peaks, there's our foothills, there's our prairies, and there's a water opening, channeling through. And what I noticed at this conference in talking to people is if you see in the top left corner, there's an opening to place, and it's in the shape of a heart. So that's what we encourage people is right in your own home, in your own backyard, that's where you go most often, is where you'll produce your greatest connection. So with this, we invite you this year to explore water, to interpret it, whether that be a portrait of yourself, because you're over 90% water, or connecting then with others to have an exhibit. And it can be as simple as having it in your own home. One of our most meaningful experiences is our nature table, where you could have a theme of water and collect from yourself, your family, or your neighbors. And so if you go online to the website, www.sayee.ca, that will allow you access to see the exhibits and the stories, the pictures on the peaks. And that can give you an example of what you could do in your own home, in your own school. It can be an idea for teachers to use in your church or any other community organization you have. So it leads us, leading from the present into the future. Next year, the water will connect us into the prairies, and our theme will be prairies. And as well, we have a couple of other engaging projects that are going, and one has to do with the Canyon Nature Club. And the young man down there on the ground, they've got the water level out, and they're measuring getting the lines of elevation on the line before they do a food forest. But again, it's that grade 8 time period that comes up, whether it was spoken by Steve or by Paul, you think, oh, what's going to happen in grade 8? And from when he was 6 years old through, he gardened, he was in the coulees, he inspired his neighbors, and they had a club. And now he's going on in different ways as a peer, but he's also coming back now and mentoring his younger sister, who is 6 years old, in her nature club. And so that's another project that we have, is being able to offer that mentorship experience online. So look for that coming up January 2013. And Paul will finish it off for us and speak about the last engaging project.
When we started to put the numbers together, I gave you some math at the start of how many events we've done, how many dollars we've spent, and then we put together how many people we've engaged. Well, there's no measurement for that, really. But we know that we've connected with more than 25,000 people, face to face. The online world is a great world. The engagement world is face to face. Get those people around the small table. Get them in a larger room. See their eyes. See their passion. Listen to their passion. We've gone beyond our community. We no longer go to science conferences. We go to world conferences. We've used the idea of TED. Many of us are familiar with TED Talks. This is an event that is free. It costs no money to acquire the TED name. You just have to have passion. We've held 3 of these. We've held 2 TEDx Banff back in 2010, TEDx Lethbridge, which was done just this past March, and TEDx Youth Lethbridge, which we held this November. The speakers come in with passion. They talk to 200 people. But the breaks and the discussions that happen beside those, listening to people for only 15 minutes, has ignited passion. We're in talks with the University of Lethbridge right now to help host one with them here in the spring, following spring. But we've gone outside that environmental circle. We have economics people, we have politicians, we have realtors. We have 6-year-old children in the same room with 90-year-old grandparents. And we're all learning together from each other to see the passion. This quote I often finish with in my presentations. It has to do with change. When it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. Those who let it happen, those who make it happen, and those who wonder what happened. And all of us at all different times will be these three people. But the middle one, taking that step forward, making things happen. Dollars will make it happen, but unless you have passion and you have the desire to make things better, it won't happen. This is a picture of well, she's 6 now, but she was 2.5. She climbs on everything. And the quote that we use for our group as a motto, live so your forefathers would be proud and that your children will be thankful. We invite you to visit us online or face-to-face whenever you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Sherry, for your great passion about what you do and your love and everything else that goes on in the experiences around you. And I hope it just keeps going further and further, and there's no end in sight. And hopefully you can handle it as it keeps growing. At this time here, we've heard them also talk about telling stories. Time for us to bring another person up about storytelling. This will be George Glott.
Thanks, Randy. I'm going to start off with just a short little history lesson. Is this thing working? I don't know. How are we doing there, Rick? Got my PowerPoint? Awesome. Technology. It's so much fun when it works. Not so much when it doesn't. Okay, we're going to start with a short history of storytelling. Back thousands of years ago, there it is. Cavemen scratched visual representations of their day on the cave walls, describing daily life like planting crops or out hunting. This technology made them content creators. And because others in the community were able to access and understand it, it made them content consumers. With time, record keepers developed systematic symbols from their drawings, and these symbols represented words and sentences, and were easier and faster to draw, and were universally acceptable, or accepted, and had a recognized meaning. The discovery of clay made portable content possible, because you could carry, or you can't carry, a cave wall around with you. Early merchants used clay tokens to record their transactions, and these tokens date back to 8500 BC. These tokens added a third component to storytelling, and that was distribution. We needed three to make it work. You need content creators, content consumers, and content distribution. Then came the development of media like paper, different kinds of ink, quills, and storytellers were allowed to now record their stories and share it with people, once again, making content creators and consumers. And now computers and word processors, software, and personal printers have made us all content creators, distributors, and consumers. Then came the invention of the photo camera. Now, everybody could not or could easily consume this visual information, but the technology to create the information was not available to everybody. It wasn't until many years later, when technology was developed, for people to have personal cameras, which was when they also became creators. Print paper made it so that we could also be consumers and distributors. Then came motion pictures in 1867. The technology was still expensive and only a select few could be content creators, and this is very popular with consumers, but they had to go to the theater to see it. Television was next. But once again, the technology to create video wasn't accessible to everybody. But the over-the-air transmission made it possible to distribute the content right into consumers' homes. But those airwaves were controlled by broadcasters. Portable cameras and videotapes were eventually developed for consumers to use so anyone could create and consume video material, but we're still waiting for some kind of distribution method that everybody could use. Well, along came the internet. Advances in compression and technology and low-cost cameras have created a plethora of video content online, and services like YouTube and Vimeo have made it easy for anyone to be a broadcaster. If we look at the stats that YouTube has posted, 1 hour of video is uploaded to YouTube every second. More video is uploaded to YouTube in 1 month than the 3 major US networks created in 60 years. Over 4 billion videos are viewed a day. YouTube is localized in 39 countries and across 54 languages. And in 2011, YouTube had more than 1 trillion views. That's almost 140 views for every person on Earth. Now, how much of that content is worthy of the ones and zeros it takes to create the digital media is up to the consumer. But once again, we have content creators, we have content distributors, and we have consumers. In the past, when these 3 components have come together, education has seemed to pick up on it because these trends have already been developed by the consumer market. Video is no different. For years, we were able to consume video in the classroom. Teachers would put on the Let's Not Smoke or the sex ed films, and then they'd leave the room as the children giggled at the silly little pictures that were on the wall, voiced by usually older men with really deep voices. But nowadays, there's lots of good online content, and these videos can give students a glimpse into the world they will never see on their own. It can take them over Mount Everest, or it can take them under the sea. Video can explain concepts that are difficult to grasp with the written word and can engage us in ways that a teacher in front of the classroom could never do. Now, I've made a living out of creating these videos, so I have a vested interest in this learning model still working. But it's a passive experience. Students sit in front of a screen and look and listen. There's no creation, there's no distribution. They don't have a vested interest in the learning. So let's get students away from being in front of a screen and put them behind a camera. Today, students have the opportunity to become content creators and consumers and distributors. They have embraced this technology and have no problem sharing their best, and in many cases their worst moments, with everybody in the world. What I've learned as a teacher in the broadcast journalism program at Lethbridge College is that the process of creating and engaging video will help students learn about the content they're creating. That has certainly been the case this week, and I want to thank the Canadian Wildlife Federation for their support of my students getting the opportunity to experience this conference. And I'd also like to congratulate them for the great job that they've done this week. When creating a news story, the first step is to research the subject matter, then find an expert to talk about it on camera through an interview. This gets the students talking about it on camera, or it gets them talking directly to the primary source of the information and not getting it from some out-of-date book or Wikipedia. This also puts them in the location where the story takes place. In the case of water, it could take them to the local water treatment plant to talk to the manager about how their water is treated. Or it could be walking through a wetland with a conservationist who's dealing with problems there. But that's only half the story. We need to remember, and others have stated it here at the conference, that we need to the science is only important to us if it affects us or someone like us. We need to give the audience someone to relate to. And in my school, we use the term Frodo as this part of the story. Who remembers who Frodo is? Anybody know? Lord of the Rings, right? So for 7 hours, we followed this little guy from the beginning all the way to the end so we could drop this ring in the lava. He's the guy that we cared about for 7 hours. And so that's what we need to do with our news stories as well. It could be a campground owner who has a campground beside a lake that's filled with green algae because of poor farming practices around the area. Or it could be it was the band chief up in Lake Chip, whose way of life has changed because of the water that's coming down from the oil sands, destroying their way of life because the wildlife can no longer survive in the waters around their communities. This was all part of a series that we had done a few years ago called Water Under Fire. It was hosted by Bob McDonald. Rick Mrazek in the back there was one of the co-producers along with Jim Byrne. When we did this series, we talked to a lot of scientists, but we really learned that the science community has to do a better job of learning how to communicate its message. Students don't want to see a lot of scientists standing there talking. What they want to see is themselves, because that's what we relate to. So, here's the process. Research the subject, find an expert to visit with them, find a Frodo and visit with them, listen to interviews, write a script, and edit the story. It's not that complicated. My students and news reporters do it every day. Students love to shoot video or work with editing software. Some like to write stories, some like to be in front of the cameras. I recommend that you put them in teams and give them clear instructions on how to create the content. Give them a template, just like I've described, and don't worry about the technology. They know how to do most of this stuff already. The biggest impediment we've found to the technology tends to be the teacher's fear of it. We've worked with teachers at the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Summer Institute to bring teachers from across the country together. Wade talked about this a little earlier. And we spend the first day of the Institute teaching them the techniques for shooting an interview, and then send them out to investigate the region and talk to the researchers working in the area. At the end of the week, we bring them back into the classroom to teach them editing and writing techniques so they can create a short 4-minute video on their experiences. Here's one of the first institutes we did back in 2009.
Kejikujik National Park, or KEJI as the locals call it, is the only inland maritime national park in Canada. It features abundant lakes and rivers, ideal for canoeing.
Much to the chagrin of their supervisor,
Several rare and special animal species can be found here. The Blandings turtle is just one of several endangered species which call KEJI home. Dr. Stephen Mockford, a conservation biologist at Acadia University, is studying the population genetics of these rare reptiles. Part of the research involves the challenges facing the Blandings turtle.
Some of the threats we know. There's some reduction in habitat, as a consequence of cottage development. Some of the threats we don't know. So for instance, we don't necessarily know that this wasn't always a small population. But we have to err on the side of caution.
José Lefebvre is a graduate student doing his master's on the conservation of the Blandings turtle. Part of his research involves using nesting enclosures to protect the eggs from predators.
Now, these teachers have said the process of creating the video makes it easier to learn the concepts because you review the material over and over again. And how many assignments do you give to students where they get to do that much review? And because they're working with cameras and editing technology, they don't even realize they're doing it. Now, here's a couple of low-price, low-cost options for schools to use. Budgets are always an issue for teachers in schools. So this is a little Kodak PlaySport, takes still photos as well. I added a little light to it just to make it so that the video looks a little better. Total price tag around $200. Though that video that was shot with a unit just like this. Add a tripod to give them a more professional look, and the students look, and their videos look more professional. Here's a short clip of my son. You guys, we shoot who we know, and we have my son who's, he was recording a head shave for a cancer fundraiser he was doing. And I said it would be, I would be the first contributor if he took the camera and interviewed people who were affected by this awful condition. And I thought it was important he understand that what he was raising the money for. He agreed, and here's a portion of one of the interviews that he did with his mother, my wife.
Ultimately, how has cancer affected your life?
Well, I lost my biggest fan. Even now when I think of him, sometimes I just miss him. He was the one person in my life who loved me unconditionally, and even if I did something wrong, he'd somehow find something happy about it. He rejoiced all my victories and sat with me through my sorrows, and we laughed and we talked into the night, and he's just the best man I've ever known. So it took him away from me.
So that kind of emotion is hard to convey in writings. Video engages audiences. Now, it doesn't just have to be news-style stories. They can also do short little dramas, as long as the storytellers are the students. Here's a video that my daughter created for her French immersion class on Italian art.
Tes yeux toujours regardent à toi. Ça serait chouette si elle pourrait parler.
Je peux parler.
Qui es-tu?
Moi, je suis Lisa Gardini. Et toi?
Je suis Alexia Montaigne. J'ai un projet d'études sociales. Est-ce que tu pourrais m'aider?
Si tu veux, je peux te donner un tour d'Italie.
Ok. Et tes valeurs sont...
Mes valeurs, c'est comme tous les autres citoyens.
Elles sont...
L'Église catholique et le Jésus-Christ. C'est comme le pape nous a dit qu'on doit souffrir sur terre. Et si on souffre beaucoup, on va avoir une plus belle place dans le paradis.
Et par les familles?
Les familles, oui, mais pas si grand que l'Église.
Et est-ce que tu as des autres croyances?
Comme quoi?
L'art social?
Oui, l'art, c'était un peu plate en premier, mais ça a développé comme très bon. Et tu as dit quelque chose à propos des sorcières?
Oui, les sorcières.
Il y avait des personnes qui pensaient que les sorcières étaient vraies, mais j'étais toujours avec Jésus-Christ.
Now, I had to help her out with the effects in the video, but the two girls came up with the idea, the script, they researched it and they wrote it, did the translation, had to listen to the material over and over again while editing. They learned the material and had fun learning the material. Remember not to get all caught up in the technology. My wife and I took a trip to Rome last year, and while we were there, we did a day of Italian cooking with Chef Fabio. Now, it was a great day, but I didn't want to didn't want to carry around my big camera, so to record it, I thought I would shoot it on my iPhone. So take a look at this.
This is Campo di Fiore. It's a very famous large market in the center of central Rome. In the daytime it's a market, and at nighttime it turns into a social gathering place where people come to drink. So in the daytime they're looking for food, at night they're looking for mojitos.
One of the best tomatoes. I go to buy strawberries because we're marinating strawberries with canned sugar and balsamic vinegar. And so
After we finished shopping at the market, we passed through some amazing sights on the cobblestone streets on our way to Fabio's restaurant called That's Amore, and from there we proceeded to his apartment where we began cooking.
It's much as fun as posting job. You have
Back on that filming job, huh?
Yeah. So that video was shot, edited, had music and narration added, and mixed, titles added and uploaded to YouTube, all from the phone. Everything was done in this little technology. There's iMovie and an app called VariCorder that works similar to editing software like Microsoft Movie Maker. The iPad has similar technology, so you don't need an expensive camera and a big editing suite to integrate this into your curriculum. Always remember that the audience will forgive lower quality if the story that's being told is engaging. Just look at America's Funniest Home Videos. Here's another option for you. So it's a DSLR. It's a regular camera, but it's been kind of outfitted with some extra equipment. The camera itself is around $1,000. All the extra accessories are also around $1,000. So you don't have to get the big expensive cameras to do really good high quality video. These work just awesome. The downside of these cameras is that audio recording can be a bit of a challenge, but you can always work around that. Here's a short segment we shot with a DSLR camera similar to this from the 2011 CWF Summer Institute up in Nunavut.
Nattarasu tamane nattu pillua omayullu tagayogum ila omayuttaugasulua pattu tamane taimangalima qaumayan nattarasuinalima pattu naqissamu tanna qisinga kisussaleerayulluni oalunni niugutissuulluni kinunaqaarutissuulluni lunni Hangalima, Ukiulima, Natarasugun Napatigu, Hangatuinale, Omayasugun Natainuluta, Town and Halunani, Kishen, Kangaku, Ukiuilangani, Omayasuum, Temeto Hangatigu, Hangatuinalema, Natarasugun Napatigu, Tamani, Tamanna, Natigil, no Palasu. Namutunya inga abamata natikile me bakkalu attunilo natili takalu me wattunilo temelo tunna nalimang inga nuti inga ayumata namutunya nakisututi.
As Wade stated earlier in his presentation, it was important that we heard their voices and their language, and that's why we tried to keep it in Inuktitut. I think today you've heard 4 different voices in the CWF material: French, English, Spanish, and now Inuktitut. Video should take people places where they normally wouldn't be able to go. Every time I travel for a project like that trip to Nunavut, I feel a responsibility not just to the clients, but also to the people that I meet and talk with. My job is to tell other people's stories and to train my students to do the same. Giving students a camera will empower them to tell their stories or share other students' experiences. They love to see a reflection of themselves on the screen, and they will be engaged. They're all just like that little caveman drawing on that cave wall. Let's get them to share their stories, encourage them to be the creators, the distributors, not just the consumers. Thanks.
Thanks, George, for your incredible history lesson there. Being a historian myself as well, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's interesting to see it. But I do love the problem of technology. And if you notice, George was completely flustered. Not. He's not afraid of it. Technology is great. Youth aren't afraid of technology. That's why they're not afraid to make mistakes, as George was showing us. They do want to tell their story, George. I love it. They want it in their voice, and they want everybody to know it right away, and they don't worry about quality. So thanks for bringing that forth. Our third speaker up right now will be Fergus. And Fergus, I understand you're talking on the next most incredible piece, social media.
Hi, everyone. Get my notes set. So my talk is called A Small Talk on Social Media, and I promise it will be a small talk. I'm not an academic. I'm a technology person. My company provided some of the resources for this conference here, and so when I was invited to speak to educators at the conference here, hoping to bring that perspective from the other side and maybe how we can use social media in particular. So, where is my clicker? It's here. Yeah, so that's me. I spent 15 years as a professional web developer. That's about half my life. Let's move on. Critical issues. This is what keeps us up at night, right? This is why we're here to solve problems for at the conference. How to get students to use Facebook in school. I think I got that right. Rick, is that what we're talking about? I was later corrected. I think it's a bit more like this. How to get teachers to catch up to the students, right? So I'll try to explore that a little bit. Here's the premise. It's about small talk. Social media is small talk. It's about, there are benefits to it if we do it the right way. It's about just getting going. It's about giving up a little bit of control. and it's about letting people share your message for you. So, a bit of a personal anecdote, which I'll tell you quickly, and then we'll get into how I think we can bring that premise back around. The topic of engaging youth. I have a tricky time with that because I'm not sure where I fit in. I don't know if I can still call myself youth. I'm 29. It's not the same as the way kids interact with technology these days. Things have changed a little bit. But I did go through high school in a social media world. And so I went to high school in a really small town in Saskatchewan. There were about 40 people in my graduating class in a town of about 1,900. And there were lots of surrounding towns. And in the neighboring towns, and we were the biggest of those towns, but within an hour, you could just about double your circle of friends if you knew the kids your age in all the other towns. And so that's not insignificant, keeping in touch with people in those other places. But in the dark ages, mid-90s, before the internet, it was kind of a difficult process. Lots of driving back and forth. And maybe you'd see people at sporting events or in the summer at jobs or when you're younger at a summer camp, but a lot of time where there's radio silence, right? But in about 1996, a group of, I think, 4 gentlemen from Israel developed this program called ICQ, which is a very early social network or messaging platform. And a couple of years after that, it trickled down to rural Saskatchewan. And one day someone showed me this neat thing where you got a little number that looked a bit like a phone number, because that's all anyone knew how to compare it to. And we started sharing on pen and paper these little numbers you could put into the computer, and your friend's name would pop up and you could talk to them. And sound a little bit familiar? It's a bit like Facebook today, right? But just about overnight, everyone started adding each other to these lists and coming online after school. And before you know it, the parents could use the phone again because everyone would just come home, hit the dial-up and dial in. And just through idle chatter, spending hundreds of thousands of lines typed back and forth between all these friends, we started going to all of each other's grads and stuff and becoming better friends. And so that's back to my premise that social media really is a lot of small talk. And I think that the more things change, the more maybe they stay the same. The other item on that slide is a very early precursor to things like MySpace called GeoCities, which is where I learned to develop my very first website in about the mid-90s. And again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's just small talk. It's people tweeting about what they had for lunch today. That's always the criticism of social media. It's just a bunch of people saying, here's what I had for lunch today. And the premise is we all talk about what we had for lunch today. I just think the place has shifted. We just do it a different place now, right? So I don't believe that small talk and conversation is necessarily a lost art among today's youth. I just think they've taken it to a different place. And there's Conan O'Brien, Tonight Show host, former, tweeting what he had for lunch today. That's a picture off the Twitter feed. And the only point of that is that it is actually kind of a relationship builder. On all these massive sites like Facebook and Twitter, they'd be empty if it wasn't for the idle chatter of young people. All of that content, the millions of videos on YouTube, George gave the numbers, all of that was created by people with some idle time. And not to diminish the transformative qualities and, news stories can break and information can come out of closed regimes through social media and that sort of thing. So not to diminish that, but often when we're talking about engaging youth, we're talking about it in this context of small talk. And I just want to, before we go on, say there are nuances between all these different networks. I don't know on this screen if we can read that, but Twitter, I am eating a donut. Facebook, I like donuts. YouTube, here's a video of me eating a donut, etc. I think about that in terms of the small talk metaphor. We make small talk in our daily lives all the time. We're standing in line next to somebody at a restaurant or at the bank, or we're at a sporting event together, or we're in a car. It's really the same skill. There's just a few different rules and etiquettes in each of those situations. You need to be literate, I think, as educators about the etiquette of the network you're using, but don't, as George said too, don't get hung up on the details and don't get hung up on that specific website or technology, because it's really the same principles, just shifted slightly in places. In fact, my favorite line on that is, Facebook is updates I don't like from people I know, and Twitter is updates I like from people I don't know. It's not that different. So, benefits, I think, of shifting some social conversations to social networks in the context of education. I think you never know where it'll go, and in conversations, if you're looking to spark something, that's not a bad thing. I think it's a bit of an equalizer, potentially. I think in a social media space, if you as an educator can talk to your students in that space, it's a bit less didactic, it's a bit less one person, a guru up at the front, talking to the rest of the room. And if you're looking to have students participate and take the lead, I think that's an obvious benefit. I also think it's true that, like the logo on the screen there, most social networks include, as a matter of principle, a method for agreeing with a statement. It's the like button, it's the retweet. That's there on all of them. And it's an easy and democratic way to sort of let the best ideas rise to the top, and I think that's often overlooked. And it's also a very familiar way for most people, youth especially, to communicate. And I think that's also taken for granted, especially if perhaps the educator themselves isn't so comfortable and familiar with that, but your students will be. Conversations on social media are easily logged, organized, and sorted. So how often do you have that great conversation? I'm sure there have been many in the rooms today and many just outside in the lobby, and there is not necessarily a record of them, and sometimes that's good, but sometimes you'd like that record, and if you can move these conversations to a space where there is that transcript, that may be a useful thing. Conversations are searchable, and they are always on. How often do we have a great conversation with somebody and then think, oh, I wish I'd said that, or I wish I'd told them that, but you can't because they're not there anymore. Social networks are always on, which may be to the benefit of the educator and the student. There's a concept called slow time, which is coined by Jason Fried, who runs a network of productivity websites and business websites called 37 Signals. And I don't know if we can read that, so I'll quickly run through it. If I can find it in my notes, maybe I'll read it off the screen. Test my eyes. Communication doesn't always have to be in real time. It can be in what we call slow time. You can post something and 3 hours later someone can get back to you, and 4 hours later someone else, and everything will work out just fine. Slow time is maybe it takes 2 or 3 days to have this conversation, and we do it in periods of 15 minutes here or there. And that's fine. It doesn't need to happen all at once unless it's really, incredibly, truly urgent, which most things aren't. They're made out to be that way, but they really aren't that important. And I think that's relevant. Planning. I know teachers really, really like to plan. And I spend a lot of time with my better half, Mallory, who's a teacher. She might even be watching. And she plans a lot. And I think that when we talk about small talk and spontaneous conversations, you don't always think about planning that to the nth degree. You could say, let's come in 10 minutes before lunch, or let's stay a few minutes after school, or let's meet here or there, and you can have a conversation. And my experience has been that I've seen, I just lost my slides. Now I don't know what to say. There we go. See how lost I am without technology? Stop dead in my tracks. You can just be spontaneous, right? If you could set up a social media space where you can interact spontaneously, it's not such a bad thing, and it's about letting go a little bit. And I think that social media interactions suffer when they are overplanned and overmanaged, because you would never overplan or overmanage your way around a reception like we had last night. No one walked in and thought, I'm going to circulate the room counterclockwise at a rate of 10 meters every 15 minutes and talk to people in this. It just doesn't happen, but sometimes I think we get caught in that with social media. I think it's a place for spontaneity. Also, if you're looking for spontaneous interaction where ideas might flow, and you're looking to meet people in the real world, you'll take them somewhere convenient, somewhere familiar, and somewhere easy to get to. You never have 3 people on one side of the city decide to get together at a restaurant on the other side of the city, right? So this is a screenshot of a system called Moodle, which I'm sure many educators are familiar with. It's a learning management system. I've used it, I've looked at it, I still can't crack it. It's just not where I hang out, and it's not comfortable or familiar. And so even though it's a very useful tool, I think, in an educational context, and even though it may have the capability to offer discussion pieces and interaction, it's not really a native environment, and it's not necessarily conducive to the types of social interactions that you might want to have with the people you're trying to engage. So going somewhere familiar, easy to use, already set up, that everyone has an account for, like Facebook or Twitter, that's got to be more conducive. And I think it's just, if you look at the real world analogy, it's clear. Other benefits, I think, are apparent in organizing data and working through social media in terms of engaging youth. There are lots of built-in tips and tricks. The top 2 networks right now are Facebook and Twitter. You could make arguments for others, but I think that's clear. But these same principles which are available in these 2 networks are likely to be available in others, past, present, future. One is location management. When a student or teacher posts something on any one of these networks, for the most part, you can pinpoint your exact location through GPS and attach it to that post. And there must be educational potential and possibilities in that concept. I'm thinking about geography or math classes, things like that. Everyone, when you go home tonight, log in and we'll figure out distances and that sort of thing. it's inherent in the systems, and it's something very hard to do otherwise and very easy to do on these social networks, which everyone has and which we're all used to using. It's a byproduct. It's always there. Photo and video, cataloging and journaling as well. If you need everyone to send in a picture or everyone to make a video and collect them in one place, I don't know if educators are using this, but I can't imagine why you wouldn't just say everyone tweet a photo at this address, then we'll have the list. You know when it's done, you know who's done what. It's inherent in the system to organize the information for you. Timeline. Facebook has just come out with Timeline. I remember many history lessons and assignments in school that were about documenting something or telling the story of a conflict or the story of water, as we've heard at the conference here this week. What an amazing tool that would be, instead of the ticker tape that runs around a room with the spots on it, to include audio, video, notes, external links, coordinates, and all the other resources that are part of the Facebook network. So that right there, I mean, it's an incredible resource, and I don't know if students have been savvy enough yet with any of the educators here or watching to submit these types of assignments through the Facebook timeline. It would be very easy to set up a page or a group and document or provide the history of anything in that format. Again, thinking about educational benefits, that's a birthday cake. And what I'm talking about is notifications and reminders. Inherent in these systems as well are notifications and reminders of all sorts of things. And if you want proof that that works for young people, check out somebody's Facebook wall on their birthday, because they will have hundreds and hundreds of birthday greetings from everyone they know. I'm sure, I'd stake my reputation, never before in recorded history have young people been so conscientious about wishing each other a happy birthday. And they do it because one little reminder pops up in the screen and they go, oh, I should do that. Other ways you can use reminders, you can set up events and have them opt in and they will be reminded. You can you could set deadlines, and through groups and other means, you can have reminders built into these social networks. When things happen, people will get notifications. When a file is uploaded, when somebody comments, the whole group gets a notification. To me, that seems like a very, very powerful component of these systems. And just to include Twitter, because I was leaving Twitter out there for a minute, it's a fantastic list manager. Everyone submit one of these. Let's get our top 5 ideas for this. In terms of crowdsourcing, in terms of organizing a small group or a large group of millions, it's a fantastic resource with a hashtag or with an @this address. I can imagine to set up an account for one class and then just use that as a repository for people's notes and submissions. Be a fantastic organizing tool. I'm going to go on a tangent here a little bit. The question's also always raised, is email going out of vogue? And Rick, you touched on this earlier. Or do people still use email and supplement that with their behavior on social networks? I think the demise of email is greatly exaggerated, but I think there's, again, some nuance there. Personally, I still get a lot of resumes at my company from young people. They do all include email addresses, and I've never had a request to text somebody a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether they got the job. But it is true as well that there are lots of short, small signals we get used to sending each other for which email is just no longer the best suited way to communicate. Are you here yet? Where are you? You know, when is this happening? Is this due tomorrow? Is this exam open book? Those communications can be really beneficially moved to a social media space where, if you think about it, first of all, there's very little spam on these networks. Spam is not inherent in all electronic communication. It's just kind of a lousy thing about email. The social networks don't suffer from it as much. Also, reply all is basically automatic. So if someone was to tweet at their teacher, is this exam an open book, and everyone else was following that, everyone would get the question and the answer without having to do anything or think about it. So I'm not necessarily of the mind that email's on its way out, but I think rather than use it as our sole method of communication, a more diverse approach has benefits. Here's a really important principle, I think, when talking about communicating socially online and engaging youth. And there's 2 thoughts in this slide. First of all, online does not always mean social. So I hear a lot about teachers setting up blogs as a way of engaging socially. I'm not always so sure that's the same thing. You know, Walmart.com is online. It's not a social place, right? Blogs, I think, can still be great places to distribute resources and to allow comments. And that's like this room here. We'll have one person at the front talking, and intermittently a microphone will get passed around for comments. I don't think that's as purely a social experience as everyone being equals around a table in something like on a Twitter account or on a Facebook account or elsewhere, whatever the next iteration of this will be. So cloud meaning internet does not always mean social. And with that, putting yourself as a peer to everyone else in these social environments means sacrificing a little bit of control. I think that's always something we struggle with our business clients, and as well I've seen it in educational contexts. It means letting go a little bit, and maybe that's a good litmus test. If you feel like you're a little nervous about letting go, you might be doing something right. Talking about sharing. In this network here, it's really a really crude picture of peer-to-peer sharing, which is something we'll talk about. It seems to me the ultimate goal would be that you not have to stand on a soapbox shouting yourself hoarse, trying to get the message out to people. It would be nice if the youth you're trying to engage could also share a message amongst themselves. If you can provide ideas and concepts that merit sharing and that are easy to share and don't have a lot of friction in doing that, your idea can get out and it's very efficient. And this is a concept that I think many youth are very familiar with through a program or protocol called BitTorrent. So if you've ever heard of downloading movies and things like that, the way that that works is there's one file on a main server, and the old way of doing things would be that one person would go and have to get this whole big file off the server. Then the next person would get this whole big file off the server, repeated 1,000 times or 10,000 times. It's very taxing on the primary resource. It's not resource efficient. In a peer-to-peer environment, everyone can go and get little pieces, and ultimately that file, that big thing on the server, only has to be moved off the server once in its whole. Everyone else will have all the bits and pieces, and through a swarm effect and through software, everyone makes little photocopies and facsimiles of the pieces they have, and then pretty quickly everyone's organized and assembled a whole. And that's a file sharing situation, but I think it's very analogous to the idea of sharing concepts and sharing bits of lessons and sharing ideas. If you can have people share your resources for you, it's very efficient. So this is the #1 song in the world right now, arguably. It's a big hit. It's a song by Gautier, an Australian artist. And look at the view count there, though. 205,430,000. That's as of this afternoon. And that's still going. This wasn't a song that became popular through MTV or through radio. It was released to absolutely no fanfare. I want to say almost a year ago. I have to check, but many, many months ago. And then something happened. It sat there and sat there and sat there. And here's the timeline of the sharing for that same video. Nothing, nothing, nothing. You see the B and the A there. That's when it was first added to Facebook. And this video, which was released, which was of little note, then became shared. Everyone else shared it. That guy didn't send 250 million emails out to all his friends and say, watch my video. Couldn't possibly, right? That snowball effect, that peer-to-peer effect, is how this has become now. He's on Saturday Night Live and he's traveling the world and on tours. He's punched his ticket thanks to people sharing his work for him. So 250, that's a small fraction of that. Did you say 4 trillion, George? 4 trillion video views a year on YouTube? So engaging youth. I was trying to find a picture of a generation gap. Truthfully, those guys are probably about the same age. And I thought I would end also with a slide about change. I heard this one time, and maybe someone else here has already heard this, but I thought it was brilliant. It was an explanation of the approach to change through the different generations. And a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mike Davies, I heard give this at a talk once, so I'm stealing it. He was talking about the greatest generation, the World War II generation, my grandparents, and their approach to change. And generally speaking, he said it was very, very cautious, and it could be described as ready, 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 aim, fire. And I think about my grandparents, they worked the same jobs their whole life. They lived in the same house. They didn't travel tons. And I think that was possibly fairly common. And then he described my parents' generation, the baby boomer generation, as a little more receptive to change. And he described that as ready, aim, fire, ready, aim, fire, ready, aim, fire. Changing careers, moving countries, that sort of thing. And then he described what I guess we'll call Generation Y as fire, 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 aim, ready. And I liked that, because it's true. It's just learning by doing. It's going out there. It's not being afraid to break stuff. We had a bit of that setting up for this conference. We just had at it, and eventually we figured it out. And so in terms of engaging youth, I think for educators, the trick is just go and do it and get started and don't overplan and don't overthink. That's what the people you're trying to engage are doing, and I think that that would be recognized in just giving things a go. And also being a little more open with documents, with files, making things easy for people to share for you. It's really a case of what's the worst that could happen, and quite often the rewards will outstrip the risks. We learned a bit about that with this conference, in fact. We thought we were asking a very modest commitment from people to register. It was just register online. If you're an educator, there's no cost. Submit your email and we'll send you a thing and you can log in and watch all of these talks. A little while later, we realized, well, what do we really want? We really want people to get this, to watch this, to share this, and to participate. And so we thought, well, let's just try putting the video on the front page of the site so anyone can get to it more easily. And that's how people are watching me now. I don't know who's at home watching me who wanted to check it out when it was posted on Facebook, but some people wouldn't have bothered registering. Now I can wave at the people who just logged on to Facebook to take a look because it was easy. And so I think that just doing stuff is something we experimented with at this conference to success. And so, yeah, I think bringing it back around to, I did it again. There we go. It's about small talk. I think a social media space is a small talk space and a conversational space, and I think that's absolutely inherent to the major social media networks right now, and I think it's important. I think there are participatory and organizational benefits to moving some interactions to that space. I think it's about just jumping in and having a go. I think it's about giving up a little bit of control as an educator, and I think it's about letting people spread your message for you, and if you do those things, I think it would be a fantastic start towards engaging youth. And that's the talk.
Small talk. Thanks, Fergus. But just to convey a little bit about small talk, my youngest daughter at the age of 22, we were talking about small talk, and when I got the phone bill, there was a long talk because I discovered that my daughter had sent or received almost 5,400 texts in a month. Working that out, that is approximately one text every 7 minutes of the day. What was she doing in school? I then turned to her and I said, dear, is there not an easier way we could do this? Oh, yeah, no problem, Dad. I'll use Facebook. There is no bill for that, thank God. But I discovered that most of her messages are under 3 words long. It's usually okay, the little smileys, and I said, and for that I'm paying on text? Okay, and I said, well, dear, why don't you go to Twitter? Oh, Dad, I can't go there. I said, why? Well, you're only allowed 140 characters. But I just got my message on the phone saying that's been changed now. And you can apply for it. So small talk is becoming big talk now everywhere, and the generations are not afraid to play with it. And that includes some of us who are not considered youth anymore, and by standards, Fergus, youth is under 35 in some places, so you still qualify. All right, now, incredible amount of knowledge, incredible amount of information. We're going to open this for questions if anybody has any for anyone on the panel. And please feel free, Rick, to run that around for me.
And as I walk this over to my colleague, so Adam, this is my risk-taking. Now you know where the real brains behind the stuff that I do lies. And part of it's sitting at that table. And on this end of the table, one that's going back to Lethbridge actually to teach my course for me that I'm supposed to be at this week. And on my way also to tell you, your bag lunches are out there. Penny went to the trouble of making you little bags of lunch to take with you for your trips wherever you're going to be heading at the end of the day.
You didn't? Now I'm disappointed. Thanks to all of you for a really, really great, stimulating panel. I was at the start of this, I was feeling the effects of 3.5, 4 days. A little tired. I'm energized now, so thank you for that. One of the things I did want to is a little bit of background is in our organization a couple of years ago, we decided we needed something that was a little bit of a different image. We hired a consultant to do a logo and everything else, so we got what we really wanted. But at the end of the day, we spent about $7,500 in professional fees. This is a great logo. How did you get this, Raphael? Okay, Fergus.
Rick's shooting lasers at me because I forgot to mention that in my talk. Sorry, Rick. Well, so my company is a web development company, and quite often we work with very small businesses. We work with businesses of all sizes, but we try to have a focus, and we try not to say we're experts at things we're not experts at. And so sometimes logo development comes up. And David, as you know, a logo development process can be a very long, arduous process. It's a weird thing for computer programmers who were all used to these hundreds of thousands of lines of code and very complex things to spend an equal amount of time making something really small with the fewest components possible and getting down to raw simplicity. So smoke comes out the ears sometimes when we do that. But we actually crowdsourced this logo, and we were looking at the time we had available before the conference, and we said, well, let's put this out to the crowd. So we used a network of professional designers on a site called 99 Designs, where people from all over the world who, if they are logo designers, graphic designers of all sorts, they can, you create a contest, you stipulate your prize, you describe your project in terms of a logo brief, you look at the values of the project and things like that. And so we thought we'd have a go, and we thought, what would be the worst that could happen? Again, that idea of just doing something. What would be the worst that could happen? If we didn't like what we ended up with, we'd be no further behind. If we did like what they came up with, we'd have this tremendous asset, and we could do all this before we really would have had time to start working on the logo development ourselves. So I spent a bit of time and I put this proposal together and put it out to the crowd, and we received, I think in the space of about 5 days, I'll have to look up the exact numbers, but I think it was several hundred entries. And it was well organized, the contest. There was a preliminary round and a secondary round. And I have to say, I did spend about as much time writing comments and feedback to each of these participants as I may have done actually working on the logo myself. But through that same amount of effort, rather than have one idea at the end, which no doubt I would have been totally biased towards and unable to see anything else that had tunnel vision on it, we had these ideas from all over the world, from many, many designers, all of which I could have a conversation with and say more of this, less of this. And it worked beautifully. And I believe our winning designer was from Indonesia. And her name was, her screen name, I don't know her real name, was San Sujana. So maybe she's watching. But, and if so, you did a good job.
And I have to admit that when we do things, we do this as collaboration in a team. And so we did run this by a number of people when we were down to about 7, I think, or less 5 to 7. And then, of course, we'll always have one that goes, hold it. I thought we agreed on the other who is sitting right next to Fergus. Other questions?
Hi, I just had a question for Fergus about social media. So with cyberbullying becoming a bigger concern in schools with students, and that's, I think, occurs mostly through Facebook and those types of things, it seems potentially troubling to invite Facebook fully into the classroom. So I wonder if you could comment on that, the unintended consequences of social media being fully integrated into schools.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's really important. And I'm sort of, I hope in that talk, discussing the potential, not necessarily advocating for let's unblock Facebook, from all the schools. I think everyone has it on their phones anyway, so I don't know if blocking it on the school networks is such an effective measure. But yeah, I don't think bullying is a problem which exists just in the cyber world or not. I suppose that you could say that, sunlight's a good disinfectant, right? And because so many social interactions are, as I said, logged, searchable, and visible by everyone to the group, I actually think that when you put groups on Facebook under their real name with a trace back to what they said, I think people tend to behave better. And the evidence of that, again, you can look for is on sites with commenting and commenting sections where you have to use your own identity. People tend to be better behaved. And when we set up sites now, we like to make sure that people have to log in and authenticate themselves through Facebook so you can see their picture, their name, rather than just let them pick a screen name, because I think it increases accountability. So it's a really big concern. And I don't know if my talk sort of proposed any solutions for that or addressed that, but at the same time, I think social networks tend to have that accountability layer built in a little bit. It may be a problem that is a little easier to solve if it's not, just in corners at lunchtime when people can't see. If it's in that space, maybe there's a little more potential for addressing the problem.
I'll speak to that too. I teach junior high, and we don't allow Facebook. We didn't allow YouTube until a few months ago. But because the internet is so accessible, kids aren't using our machines anyways. They're going and using their own devices. So for us to restrict the potential of Facebook because of that factor, it's happening with their own devices off of our networks anyways. So to have that record would help us, because it is, if it's on their own phone, on their own network, it is the back of the lunchroom still. We don't know that it's happening. So I'm full support of bringing the social media stuff into the schools.
Hi. Thanks for your talk as a start. I must admit that Facebook has totally changed our lives in the past few years. I mean, now we socialize, we read the news, we share the ideas. And the most interesting part is that our Egyptian revolution, I don't know if most of you have known that, started from Facebook. It all started with an event, okay, we are going to start this protest or just a stand, and that is where things started to go on until we reached our Egyptian revolution. So that's why I must admit that Facebook has totally changed our lives nowadays. Yeah.
I had to sort of comment on that and include that in the talk because it does run counter to the idea that only small talk happens on those networks. So that's obviously an incredible other aspect of the social media, and let's just hope that doesn't, I mean, we're not caught in political turmoil all the time on social network. Hopefully there's downtime as well.
I wonder if maybe we could do a reverse on the question following up, coming back to Yasmin, and just ask then at this point in time, what has been either the backlash or the acceptance of the public and the powers that be in Egypt with the social media because of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember I had like few family members not using Facebook, and just after the revolution, 100% of them now have Facebook accounts, and everyone is so interested to follow what is Facebook. Even my mom, who's not very into technology, she created a Facebook account, and she's always asking me, why don't you teach me how to do that and how to do this? So I must admit that, yes, it has changed a lot. I mean, the Egyptian Facebook users must have increased like 50 or 60% after the revolution. And it really, I mean, where we cannot find freedom of speech just a few months ago, with Facebook, we almost have the excess, or I mean, extra freedom of speech. We now can express our feelings, we can share videos and photos of things that were never revealed on normal TV and media. So, yeah, it has made a big difference.
And to follow with that, when it's your mother coming to you, she's coming to the expert. Okay, we have to realize we are no longer the experts, those of us that are 35 and over. The experts are there, and we have to rely on them, and they are there.
Hey, thanks so much, you guys. It's been really interesting to hear what you had to say, especially Fergus. I don't know if you were here earlier on and listened to a couple of things that I've been doing with my company, but one of the things I hesitate when I listen to all the social media, and because it's been a powerful tool for my company, Jockware, because one of the things we launched this year was Are You the Next Jock Boy, Jock Girl campaign, and it was reaching to Canadian youth ages 13 to 18, where they could upload a video and tell their story of why they think they should be that next Jock Girl, Jock Boy. And it was fascinating to get the feeds, and when we actually put it into the host of the last week of voting, and this was with a company where pretty much myself, we've got a board of athletes, a very small management team, and we just started, had 17,000 users within 24 hours vote. One of the girls out of little Moosomin, Saskatchewan, who won, had over 5,700 votes. There's not even 5,700 people in Moosomin.
I've been there.
So yeah, there you go. You know where it is. So. But the neat thing is I've been sitting in, and I'm from Ottawa, and I spend a majority of my time in Toronto, Montreal, because that's where most of the investments come from. And you are youth, by the way, at the age of 29, 35 and under. Woohoo,
cool.
We're still there.
That's good.
Is actually the fear and going into all these Facebook and Twitter campaigns, and I've met some of the VPs that run that, is what happens when Facebook is no longer there? What happens when Facebook becomes a charge? And we've got Google+, we've got all these platforms right now, Tumblr being a huge thing that youth are using, which I believe in the next 12 months, Tumblr's gonna be even larger than what Twitter is. And that neat thing with Facebook is, if we're sitting up here and you guys are all educated panels and we're all in this room and people that are watching online, is there not a way within the social means, if we're already realizing that youth are really educating the educators right now, or they're no longer really caring because they're bored. And yourself, you're in technology. I hate to go on about this, but you probably didn't, you're not challenged enough. If you went into a computer science tech program right now, you would laugh at it. You'd be better off sitting at home, which is what I've learned from one of my board of athletes who, at the age of 10, was making $17,000 a month at the age of 10 off of Google because he learned how to crack code and work with games. So his parents were like, well, here's a computer, go to your room, have fun. So you've got these unbelievable minds out there that are like that. And, is there a way to maybe create a platform that is the reverse, where it's actually, instead of using Facebook as a platform, why are we not creating a platform that is done by the youth, that educators can all be a part of, so that we know it's going to continue to run? That's not being done. I'm just throwing it out there, and I might put a patent on that, but there you go. What do you guys think about something like that? We're using all these resources that are there. Why can we not be creating as a global community an actual resource that youth can always do, and we're not actually relying on another company?
It's a pretty big question. No, but a couple of the things you said, I mean, I totally agree with. To be honest, and when Rick asked me to give this talk, at first I was a little reluctant, because as a computer science person, I suppose, although you also said it's often better off teaching yourself. I'm self-taught. I've never learned computer science anywhere. So it's a self-taught thing because the technology does move so quickly. So I agree with that. There's also a lot of tension sometimes between people who look at and who examine this at this fairly deep, substantial level, at the level of learning computer code and computer programs. And there's sometimes a bit of a resentment actually towards these guys who run around, these social butterflies who are on every platform and giving you 5 business cards with 30 logos. You're supposed to follow them on every site. So yeah, we get a little bit of fatigue from that sometimes, and I think there should be something more substantial. There's a Canadian company, I think, called Raspberry Pi, who've just released a $35 computer that's fully programmable. It's the size of a pack of gum, basically. And so that's their big campaign, is to make programming something accessible again to the individual and to kids, and it's almost a disposable unit, right? It's costs less than a steak in this hotel, probably. So there are movements in that direction, but I also totally agree. I mean, I think that's why at the talk I tried to focus a little more on the level of principle. These are the principles, these are inherent to all these networks, rather than let's get really good at Facebook, because I mean, it could go the way of MySpace, which there's tumbleweeds rolling through right now. So yeah, I think all good points, but I don't know the answer to how to take it to the next level.
I have a question for your topic, but I think I would open it up to anybody else in the audience to ask. Is we are asked to consider 7 generations into the future for every decision that we make, and something else I was coming across and reflecting on was to also consider, which is right in front of us, the children, and those people are directly caring for the children with the environment that we create. And so I'm wondering, with that idea about being present and in the home, there's some school philosophies, Waldorf, or in certain homes they choose not to, during the elementary school years anyhow, have media there. And I'm wondering how, I don't have the answer. I'm wondering how that looks like for the environment where the mother's being present with a baby and wanting other people to be there to create the culture or the environment or the slow time in the garden. And has there been stats on that? That's the second question. Are people who are on social media, do they also garden or spend time in nature? Can those two go together? And I don't know those answers.
Actually, I can answer part of that. I think probably one of the best people I've encountered in terms of being up on the research on those kinds of questions, because he's also done a lot of work with Richard Louv out of the United States, and that's Ted Ritzer with basically visitor services parks here in the province. And I would simply go on the government site, and I can pass on Ted's email to you. He is probably one of the most articulate in some of those components. And I do know that there has been a large push and effort within those sectors, because basically, and terminology keeps changing, but tourism parks basically is the core element of that branch. I think it's not, David, still. But that group has really been struggling with how do you get people back out into the parks, get them back into the experiential components, back into nature, but utilizing the technologies. And I think where it's going, because Trevor Dirksen out of Calgary has done a lot of work in that direction as well, is that's where the creation of apps and things like that, to where basically now they're trying to turn these tools back into the movement to the face-to-face, back into the nature component, but in extended communities. It's so taking the best of the technology part. But I think one of the things that we have to get our heads around, because we being at the University of Lethbridge, one of the partners in the research that was done in this province, bringing in video conferencing when wide bandwidth was extended throughout the province. And in the classrooms I sat in for 3 years, we were working with the Canadian Space Agency and their programs, is that at the start of the 3-year period, there was a strong advocacy within the school system, no, don't let the kids set up the equipment. Okay? No, that's the teacher. Again, this control ethic. Well, I'll pick one site, Orient. Anybody know where Orient is? Few, it's way out there, all right? Those kind of communities, we were working with 5 schools where one social studies teacher, grade 9 social studies, and you know those communities are very small. So this way you had a social studies specialist working with those 5. At the beginning, it was exactly like that. Within 3 weeks, the kids took over. The students were dressed better, behaved better than they did in their other classes, etc. Because now this was a social tool. They happily set everything up because they used it for the 5 minutes before or after that class to communicate with the other students. And so it's, again, the thought of what we think we're using the technology for by comparison to what it's really used for by the youth. So I think your question is a pretty complex one, because it's through time, I think this stuff is changing so fast that we still haven't figured out what role the technology is. I'd throw that one back out. I know George and Fergus are struggling with this. Actually, Paul has been silent on this one, because here's somebody that is in the career and technology studies area. And that's basically what we do within those classes, is it not, Paul?
It is. I think once we work with implants, we'll be able to use the shovel still. The technology, for example, in my science project, Google Maps, the idea of using video cameras and photograph cameras in the field was an engagement tool. Without that, would it have made it better? I'm not sure. It's easier to record, it's easier to share. Technology in the classrooms, we spend a lot of money in our classrooms on technology, and it's sort of like environmental issues. We don't educate the educators on how to use them. So Rick's comment of the kids knowing what to use it for, yeah, the educators are sitting back and watching because we don't know how to turn it on, you know. So it's evolving quickly, and we're not putting any money into our school systems to educate the over 30 people.
And
just barely.
Just to add to Sherry's point about, do people who use technology still garden? I can't speak for everyone, but I know that tech fatigue is a really big issue that I spend a lot of time trying not to get too close to it. In my house, for example, there's not another personal computer, just my laptop, hardly watch TV, and really have to make an effort. I mean, not an effort, it's a thing you want to do. I have a huge amount of envy for people who can just get out of cell phone range and spend a couple weeks of the year by a lake or something like that, or in another setting, because I think that it would be pretty sad just to be glued in front of the monitor all day. And I think a lot of people who do work with technology, especially staring at glowing rectangles as many hours of the day we do, are pretty aware of that. But for me personally, you know, those other hobbies and getting outdoors and things is really important, because otherwise you question your sanity. So I think that that separation is important.
Just going back for a few moments on this, since it's getting to that point, Rick, when Fergus, you mentioned the $35 little camera, I quickly looked out. 4 people immediately went, not to their laptop, one did, or to their iPad, they went to their phones, which was perfect, and that's what I was looking at, in case some of you were wondering what I was scanning the room for to see who would go there.
Yeah. It's called Raspberry Pi, P-I.
Yeah. Second of all, Angela, you're worrying about the network? Don't worry about it. The real youth, not the under 35, the under 15, will find the next free one, and it will spread like wildfire. So we don't have to worry about that one. Last of all, I was a distance educator working in the pilot as a pioneer in 1990, and I learned a long time ago, let the students play. Don't say you can't touch that, you'll break it. Let them play. They're not afraid. They won't break. It's an old adage that generates from the generation before and before. They will work it out perfectly, and if they take ownership, it just grows and flies. And last but not least, Sherry, your comment brings us all the way back to the beginning with Adam. Getting outdoors, experiencing it, and taking the technology with you and making it all grow together. So on that, I'd like to thank my 4 panelists here, Paul, Sherry, George, and Fergus, for some wonderful information and insight into their futures and where we're heading. Thank you. Based upon that, they're going to force me to give you something. And
Well, for those online, wanting to let you know, the Wire Dragons are doing it again, throwing a little bit of a shift in here. It's a beautiful day, and these people have been so patient. You've been so patient, because I know that you have to get out.
my technology.
He's one phone ahead of me. I was actually going to swipe that one. We really appreciate all of you that have been with us through the week. This is not the end. This is the beginning of this dialogue. And thank you so much again to the contributions. And today's been fantastic. I mean, starting out with that enthusiasm this morning and that spirit of adventure. And when I'm listening to the technology part, we want to talk about risk-taking. Oh, wow. We're seeing it every day. And to my 2 colleagues in particular, that for those that didn't catch us on that first day, because it's all loaded there for you now, along with all those wonderful little documentary pieces from the Lethbridge College graduates. Wow, George, somebody at your institution is doing an incredible job. And the camera people, etc., it's all been wonderful. But the risks, that hit home the first day that we started here, is when Fergus shows me this thing, which I thought he fabricated, because you're going, come on, I read a lot of Ludlam, and I love those and all that. And he says, the Russians just cracked into and brought down Ustream. Yeah, right. Give me a break. Sounds like a nice little novel, right? Real. That's scary as well. Because that's one of the things I wanted to point out. We're using these like any other tool in the best way that we can, but we cannot take them for granted. They can also be misused. So we want to demonstrate how we can make the best use of these tools. This site is going to continue on. I think David's going to say a little bit about that at the end. We've been trying to figure out how to fund it, like Angela does with different things. And we can guarantee this is the beginning. We do want you to give that deep reflective thought. The site is going to be there. We would like you to go on, use the educator site for the free entry, because again, it's not a control issue. It's to make sure that we can capture the comments, because it's on the inside for the participants. There's a discussion area there. Think about what's happened this week. View what we've put up there. Give us your suggestions. What are the next steps? Where do we go to from here? And in order to do that, we have to do a little summary of where we've been.
It's probably about 9 months ago that Rick and I were sitting in his office in Lethbridge and talking about what we hope to have accomplished at this event. And I think we began by by thinking, well, let's do this great big huge thing where we, fill the largest conference hall we can get, to where we actually settled on the idea that what we wanted to have was a very open, free exchange of ideas that was shaped to a large degree by some of the real leading thinkers in this area of water. Water is complex. As we've heard throughout this past 4 days, it's always something that's emotional, it's personal, it's economic, it's political, And whether we have faced shortages or difficulties with water ourselves yet or not, the issue is really predominant around the world, and as populations increase, the way that we deal with it will become more important. And I guess capturing some of the ideas that people have expressed, we've had more than one presenter talk about the need for hope, the need for optimism, the need for enthusiasm, for excitement. And I think that's where we're beginning now, is to take everything that we've heard and learned from each other over the last number of days and starting to capitalize on it in our own career pursuits, in our own responsibilities. Echoing one of the other things that my mother taught me years ago, which I probably didn't know she taught me until I got much older, is that she said to me, she said, you know, if you don't learn something new every day, shame on you. And so I hope that that's what we've been able to do, and I hope going forward we can all take these resources that have been produced, we can share them with our friends and with our colleagues, we can continue the dialogue, and our hope is that 2 years from now, when we do this again, we will have such a body of work and actually stories of success that have led out of the conversations we've had, that we will no longer feel overwhelmed by the challenges, we'll feel invigorated by them. Thank you all for your attendance, for your working with us, and safe travels home. And you don't have to think about water tomorrow, but Monday's fine. Thank you.